Hello everyone and welcome back to my home office today. It is Tuesday the 15th and today I wanted to let you know, in case you haven't figured it out already, that due to the glitches that we had in Brightspace and the fact that I couldn't get your grades up fully to you until yesterday, I think it was, that I didn't want to throw another exam in the mix before you had a chance to sort of absorb how the exams work. And a few of you I've emailed about this already. Here's the thing. For these exams, they are only testing that you know where to find information. That's why they're open note, open lecture, open book, whatever. Because of that, I only make them worth 100 points each. And what that means is 100 points out of 1,000. So you can earn as many points up to 1,000 as you can, and that will determine your grade. If you score over 900 points, then you're going to get an A. And I don't do pluses and minuses on A's. I do pluses and minuses on B's, C's, and D's. And, sometimes people find that helpful. But because you can't get an A plus, I don't really like to give out A minuses. So anything over 900 points is an A, as I explained in my syllabus. That means that, and I don't remember who did what on this exam, but for example, if you got 60 points out of 100, you might think to yourself, well, that's 60%. That's barely passing. That's a D minus. But that's not how that works. The way to think about it is this. You have the potential to earn 1,000 points in this class. You need over 900 in order to get an A. You need over 870 in order to get a B plus. You need 830 to 869 to get a B. This means that you now, if you got, say, a 60% on this exam, or 60 points, I should say, then you have lost 40 points out of 1,000. That means you could still lose 60 points in the class and still get an A. You can lose 160 points and still get in the B range. So don't freak out. These tests are designed just to make sure that you're reading, make sure that you are getting the lectures, not any other purpose really. And that's why they're worth so little. What I really want us to focus on in this class is going to be, aside from just comprehending the reading, is the actual translation of that into your papers. So I've had your papers for about 2 weeks now. Well, it'll be 2 weeks tomorrow, I believe. So hopefully they will all be graded and done for you. I'm not going to guarantee that, but I'm close. So it's looking good for that. And as for exam the second, you just got your exams back on Monday completely that I know of. And some of you asked for feedback on that, and I gave it to you. And I'll be honest with you, if you missed points on the exam, chances are you just got a multiple choice question wrong, which is sort of the danger of multiple choice questions. There's one right answer and the other ones may be confusing. That's the nature of those. And then, or you did not completely answer the question. For example, some people put half of Aristotle's definition of rhetoric, or some people listed the 3 artificial proofs but didn't define them. Those sorts of things is really what ended up hurting the most, taking away the most points from the greatest number of people. So I want you to keep that in mind when you take exam 2. I will be posting exam 2 on Friday. So we are delayed by 1 week, and you will have 7 days to take that exam as promised in the beginning of the semester, and it will be online and open to you for that entire week. You have 1 shot to take it, but you can take it at your convenience whenever you'd like. There's no timer on it. There's no time limit. It will be the same exact format as test 1. Some multiple choice questions and a couple of short answer questions. So hopefully that helps you out. I believe that your syllabus tells me that that exam will be covering Ramus through Blair. So today's lecture won't be on there, obviously. So Ramus through Blair, those are the ones that you're going to focus on for exam number 2, which will be posted on Friday, and you will have 1 week to do it. So basically, just delay that on the syllabus by 1 week, which hopefully, it's not a big deal to the schedule for us. Hopefully it's not a huge deal to you. And then, of course, your second paper is not due until December 6th. I say that with some pause. That is 6 weeks away. And I don't want us to sort of just like randomly forget about it. Okay. So, stay on top of it. If you want to turn it in early, you can. I have zero problem with that. If you want to turn it in on the day that it's due, that's your choice too. I have no problem with it. I have put up the written instructions for you, and there's also the video that gives you oral instructions on the exam. If you have any questions, of course, as always, just let me know. I try to answer as quickly as I can on email. Some of you, I know you get an answer back like literally immediately. It just depends on whether I have my phone on me or if I'm sitting in my office working. Obviously, that's going to be a very quick response. So it just depends. But you can call, text, email anytime that you want to ask any of those questions that you want for clarification. So keeping us on schedule, though, for the reading means that today I am talking to you about Richard Whately. And Richard Whately is going to sort of move us a little further into the modern period. So let's talk about what we mean by the modern period and what we mean by modernity. I talked a little bit about it last time, I know. The modern period is defined essentially by architecture and art as being functional. Clean lines, very, very square, and function over form is what's important here. So if you think about mid-century modern, like the furniture is very squared off, very simple. There's not a lot of ornate details to it. It's very, angular, not a lot of circles or soft edges or anything like that. Couches, chairs, a lot of wood that is sort of done in that traditional mid-century modern style of straight and even, and there's equilibrium there. And this artistic idea, which originated, as I said, in architecture, bleeds over into other forms of art. And one of those forms of art is speaking, that it bleeds over into. Now, most of us are pretty aware that when you read a book that's modern, that there is a direct and very clear path of the plot. You start out with introducing characters, you go into some actions, you hit a climax, and then when you hit that peak point, you have a conclusion to the story. And that's how a traditional modern plot works. And a traditional modern speech is the same thing. It's very functional. It is defined by a very clear outline and a progression from an introduction to a preview to the main points and transitions in between each, and moving into the conclusion and telling your audience what you want them to do with all of the information that you've just given them. So it's very linear. Okay, very square, very functional. This is true as we move in rhetoric as well. We are getting rid of this problem of the aesthetic. We're not doing anything overly ornate or tricky. We are just very simply working with the linear progression from one beginning to an end in linear deductive form. Now, I bring that up here because as we move away from that trap of science and reason versus art versus the definition of rhetoric, we get into the modern era and becomes very clear and very black and white what is and what is not considered rhetoric. One of the things that is very clearly considered rhetoric is courtroom rhetoric. As I told you, George Campbell talked a little bit about courtroom rhetoric, but he was mostly interested in moral reasoning when it came to rhetoric, that rhetoric's purview was sort of in that moral evidence area. Same thing for not I.A. Richards, I apologize. It's the same thing for our theorist today, Richard Whately. Richard Whately was interested, though, specifically and only in courtroom rhetoric. So he comes up with this sort of take on the stasis system, that idea of dialectics, of going back and forth between two equally opposing views, and says that courtroom rhetoric begins at that point of stasis, when you have two oppositional ideas that are equally of import. Let's say, for example, guilt and innocence, right and wrong, and so on. That is, just as Aristotle said, where rhetoric begins. So rhetoric begins at that point of stasis, and for Richard Whately, that point of stasis is clear in a courtroom. And you could see that. I mean, that just kind of makes logical sense, I think. And let me know if not. But you've got two opposing sides going back and forth, and in the middle, somebody has to make a decision, whether that's a judge or a jury, right? So there's some evaluation that has to be made. Whately was the first one who came up with this idea that between the accusers and the defense, or between the prosecution and the defense, that there is this sort of mixing of who has presumption and who has a burden to prove that presumption wrong. We are talking about the British system here, so we are not talking about the American court system, and that's going to become important in just a minute. In the British court systems, in the Queen's Court, if you will, or the Royal Court, what really happens is that presumption rests with whoever is speaking. That if they are speaking, they are saying what is. We can presume that when they end, they have made an argument that has yet to be opposed. Okay? That makes every time that the defense speaks, every time, there's a presumption of the status quo, that you don't change the status quo until whoever has the burden of proof can actually overcome that stasis, that status quo. So what you end up with is the burden of proof shifting back and forth between the two sides, and presumption switching between the two sides. But the burden is always about changing the status quo. Therefore, when theorists in the American system, I should say the United States system, honestly, when we picked it up, we thought, well, wait a minute, presumption lies with the status quo, and we presume all people to be innocent until the burden of proof is met that they are guilty. So until the other side can prove that my client did something, we have presumption. And so while Richard Whately is talking specifically about presumption and burden of proof, switching back and forth, we say, no, there is a presumption of innocence on behalf of the defendant. And you have to overcome certain burdens in order to prove it otherwise. If you're wondering how that plays out in the American system versus the British system, there are some easy ways to sort of see this if you really want to bore yourself to death. Like one of those is to sit and watch courtroom experiences in Australia or Great Britain, any of those places. You can watch courtroom experiences. They don't usually have courtroom dramas over there, with good reason. Over here in the United States, you can watch courtroom action, And you will very clearly see that all of the burden to prove something true, to prove someone is guilty, it takes a lot. Presumption is very, very heavy. Here's some examples of ways that you know that. If you've ever heard of the O.J. Simpson case, I would, normally just say the O.J. Simpson case, but recognizing that many years have gone by since then. The O.J. Simpson case, everyone was convinced that he was guilty. And the courtroom came out, the jury came out and said not guilty. And there was no explanation for it, just not guilty, suggesting that the district attorneys did not prove that he did it, that he killed Ron Goldman and his ex-wife, okay, Nicole. So there is a not guilty verdict. He is free to go. Now, in a criminal courtroom, it takes a lot to overcome that presumption of innocence. And a lot of people say, well, you weren't in the courtroom, we don't know what the jury saw versus what we were allowed to see. They may have seen some evidence that was counter to what we were seeing in, outside of the courtroom. So it was a harder burden for the prosecution to meet than most of the people out in sort of the social discourse of the world really thought. However, Ron Goldman's family and Nicole Brown Simpson's family was able to sue O.J. Simpson in civil court for wrongful death. Now, here's the thing. In a civil court, because we're talking about money and not criminal incarceration or taking away somebody's freedom, we're usually talking about money and that's it. Because of that, civil court has a much lower bar for burden of proof, meaning that it is a lot easier in a civil court to prove somebody did something wrong than it is to rest on presumption like in a criminal court. And so O.J. Simpson was found to be liable for the wrongful death of Nicole and Ron. And he had to shell out a lot of money. From what I understand, it's undisclosed, but I would imagine it was a good amount of money. He was worth a lot. And he didn't have to serve jail time, but at least there was some sort of resolution to the question of who do we believe did it, okay? And that's normally what civil cases are used for. Civil cases are where people take cases because they can't win in criminal court. Let me give you another example. If any of you were Steelers fans in the 90s, Ben Roethlisberger, the early 2000s, I guess I should say, Ben Roethlisberger, famously a quarterback, a franchise quarterback for the Steelers, very well-loved football player. Sometimes I questioned his intelligence, but that's only because, he and I went to the same school I was getting my master's degree and he was getting his undergraduate. But he played for that school as well. And not the brightest, marker in the highlight pack, so to speak. But does that mean that he was a horrible person who assaulted young women in bar bathrooms? Who knows, right? But here's what we do know. Never once was he served, never once was he charged with any wrongdoing of any criminal type, okay? Now that is difficult to do, let's face it. And with someone famous like O.J. Simpson or Ben Roethlisberger, that is difficult to do. What's not difficult to do is to get that person accused enough that they will pay you money to shut up. And so in a case in Colorado, very early on in his career, he was accused of assault on a woman, a young woman, and she didn't press charges. Nobody pressed charges. She didn't even want to press charges, but she wanted to take him to court and civil court. Specifically, that is a way to get money. Now, is that compensation because you were assaulted? Possibly. Is that compensation because you just wanted money? Also very, very possible. And it's a lot easier for famous people, especially celebrities or otherwise, who have a lot of money to just pay people to go away. That's a lot easier on their reputation. At the time, Ben was not married. Eventually, he did get married, and he was accused of being inappropriate in a Georgia bar restroom with a minor. Now, there's a lot of questions here. Number one, what is a minor doing in a bar? Why is she in a bathroom in a bar? Why was he in the same bathroom at the same time, whichever bathroom this was? There's a lot of questions that go on here, and so it was criminally investigated but never criminally charged. The reason for that would be that they don't have enough evidence for the burden of proof to be met, which means that they can't get it over that threshold in a criminal court. And so instead, you end up just, in this case, I don't believe anything ever ended up happening. It wasn't taken to a civil court. I would imagine that there was some question about what she was doing in that bar as a minor, who let her in. There's a lot of questions there. So the question is, was that Ben being wrong, or was it a bunch of little things that came together that allowed for an accusation to be made? I don't know. We're never going to know. But what we do know is that there is a different standard to charge someone with criminal action than there is to charge them with civil action. Okay? And that partially, at least, comes from Richard Whately, who has set up this idea of a burden of proof versus presumption, not presumption of innocence. That is uniquely a United States thing, okay? Uniquely. It's presumption that whoever is speaking, that they're winning at the time. This is why you have the courtroom set up the way that you do. And the prosecution always gets the last word because they have a heavier burden in a United States courtroom. It works slightly different in royal courtrooms. So I'm no lawyer in the United States or abroad, so I can't really tell you what that difference is, but it functions differently. So if I ask you the question, what are the two main principles or standards that Richard Whately brought to our understanding of rhetoric? It's going to be presumption and burden of proof, not presumption of innocence and burden of proof. I hope that's clear to everybody. There's a big difference between the two, but this is where we get a good explanation of how courtroom rhetoric works. All right. I hope that helps you out when you're reading Richard Whately. I was talking to some people today, and we were talking about the fact that you don't really need these lectures if you read the book. That is absolutely true, unless you want it. I mean, hopefully maybe it helps organize thoughts or highlights what's important. But if you're reading the book, you don't need my lectures. However, if you're only watching the lectures, that's not going to be good enough. So consider that as we come up on the second exam, if that was a problem that you had on the first exam, or if you want more points, or whatever way that works. So the point of today is, number one, don't worry about your grade on the first exam. Think about it in terms of 1,000 points available to you and how many you need to score in order to get the grade that you want. Number two, you will be having your second exam, but it won't start until this coming Friday. Okay, so instead of ending on this coming Friday, it's going to start on this coming Friday. And then you'll, of course, have a full 7 days to do it. Third, that I want you to focus on your papers, and that your second paper is due on December 6th. And yes, you will have your first papers back. And I will tell you when I put the grades up, and if you don't receive them this time, I'm going to need you to tell me that you didn't receive them, just like some of you did with the exam. We are struggling with Brightspace, and I do apologize, but I'm doing my best to work it out. And you all are very, very helpful, as I said before. So there's your schedule for now. What we need to worry about: keep reading. Work on your papers, get ready for the feedback on the first paper that will hopefully help you on the second. And if you need anything at all, please feel free to let me know. And I will see you all on Thursday when we will be talking about, I don't know what's on the agenda for Thursday because I literally just let my phone close and I took my glasses off. So apologies for that. So on the 17th, Nietzsche, very exciting. You'll enjoy reading Nietzsche, probably. Or you might fall asleep. We'll see what happens. Okay, everybody, I will talk to you on Thursday when we address Nietzsche. Let me know if you need anything in the interim.